With Stephon Gilmore in the cornerback room, are we fixed? We good? Do we get it? Maybe? Welcome to Locked On Vikings.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. My hashtag everydayers, the backbone of the Locked On Podcast Network. Appreciate you all so very much. If you're new here, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for checking this out. You can find Locked On Vikings wherever you find your favorite shows, whether it is anywhere where you listen to audio podcasts, such as the SiriusXM app. And you can also search out Vikings, and you can find live broadcasts of all Vikings games, including this Saturday's tilt against the Philadelphia Eagles. You can also find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku if you download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. Twitter Tuesday today. That means I'm taking your questions as submitted to me via email at lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com, via the Google form in the show notes, which you can fill out anytime, or on Twitter when I put out a call, usually sometime on Monday mornings, afternoon, I guess sometimes for Minnesotans. First one I'm answering today comes from Bad Dad Joke. It is one of many about Stephon Gilmore, who just signed with the Vikings for a $10 million deal, 7 of it guaranteed, so I'm going to guess the other 3 is incentives, to shore up that cornerback room. Like briefly on the news of it, I didn't think that it would happen. Usually when a player comes in, visits, and then leaves, you kind of leave it at that until a circumstance changes. But I guess the circumstance that changed is like the delay wasn't that he wasn't ready to sign on the spot. It was that the Panthers were also involved. And so that had to play out, which I didn't know that the Panthers were also involved in this. So it kind of had come down to those two teams. But now Stephon Gilmore, he's wearing number 23. He's already working with the first team in practice. He's ready to go in. Shaq Griffin, by the way, working back into practice. So the cornerback room is starting to feel a little bit more whole, which brings me to Bad Dad Joke, who asks, with the addition of Gilmore and the emergence of McLaughlin, have the cornerbacks done enough to no longer be considered the prime liability of this roster? God, I really wish I could just confidently be like, yeah, absolutely, we're Gucci now. But like, I don't think we're Gucci, folks. I can't quite say that we're Gucci. Stephon Gilmore is 33 years old. He is absolutely not in his prime anymore. I don't think that's controversial, but time only goes in one direction. So whatever he did last year, which was respectable, I guess I'll say, it only can be expected to go down from here. So what do you get out of him? Is he a CB2 now? Is he, a cornerback one that's a liability against the upper echelon of the league? Like, what is he now? Byron Murphy, I feel okay about. Shaq Griffin, we'll see. Kind of missed all of the preseason and camp and stuff like that, but at least he's getting in now. He'll have 2 weeks basically of totally uninterrupted practice, so he'll be able to get in for the game plan and all that. Be ready for the Giants in week 1. Fabian Moreau also in there as like a possible depth piece. McLaughlin. The emergence of McLaughlin, he had a pretty good preseason game. I would kind of like maybe chill out on like the emergence of, I don't think that he becomes part of the starting room. I think he just makes it harder for you to choose who gets that 6th spot, which is a good thing. But we're talking about him as, maybe he makes the team, not, maybe he like impacts the Vikings on a week-to-week basis. We're talking special teams for him. So I still think it's the prime liability of the roster. Plus, we blitz a lot. So if we don't have our corners in zone, and we aren't protecting them with those schemes, they're exploitable. If you can beat that corner fast in man-to-man coverage, you can ruin the whole thing that Flores is trying to do. So I still think it's the prime liability on the roster. Rock NHL asks, why Stephon Gilmore and why now? If they thought he could help the cornerback room, why wouldn't they have signed him at the beginning of the summer? I think that's a very valid point. The Vikings sat on a lot of cap space until all the way into August here. Now, look, with old guys, it's a little more acceptable to miss some preseason, right? Maybe Gilmore was just farving it and just saying, "Hey, I'll join when the games really count, but I'm not going to go in and do the dog days of training camps." Maybe it's that, but really, I think the reason behind the timing is all money. When you're asking questions like this, by the way, if the answer can be money, it's probably money. I'm going to guess that over the course of free agency, he was asking for a lot more than what he ultimately got. And then once he had lowered his asking price to something that teams were interested in, then you had the Vikings and Panthers kind of bidding against each other in that range, and the Vikings won the bidding war. That part is also going to take a little bit of time. So I guess that's why now. And the answer to why Stephon Gilmore, I mean, look, former All-Pro, was the best corner in the league at certain points in his career. Obviously past that, what you get out of him now, I don't know. And we'll just have to wait and see on that. But worked with Brian Flores back when they were winning Super Bowls in New England, and has a long track record of man coverage, which is very important when you've got a blitz happy D coordinator. So if he can still man up, even with, everybody's pretty good receivers, maybe not their Jamar Chases, but their T. Higginses, then, that gives you a lot more leeway to do some of the more aggressive stuff with Brian Flores and not have to do this like weird, sketchy zone stuff behind it. So that would be why Gilmore. In terms of the timing, probably about money. All Purple Everything asks, what is the more valuable part of the Gilmore signing? Play on the field or leadership and sharing knowledge with the younger DBs? What younger DBs, dog? They're all gone. Booth is gone. They drafted Kyrie Jackson. Obviously that's a tragedy. They've got an undrafted guy, McLaughlin, and a Caleb Evans, who's only got 2 years left on his contract anyways. I don't know if he's like a, young, youthful, developmental kind of player. Fabian Moreau is a veteran. It's been in the league for 7 years. Shaq Griffin is a veteran, been in the league for a while. It's all a veteran group now. So I think the answer has to be play on the field. M. Peters 897 says, what are your expectations for Shaquille Griffin this upcoming year? Boy, that's another great question, and I don't have a great answer to it. He will I would have said he'd be CB2. He probably still is, or maybe CB3, and he becomes he or Stephon Gilmore probably become the guy that goes off in nickel packages. So here's what I'm curious about when we see the Giants. When it's base, or anything that would have two corners on it, who comes off the field? I wouldn't be surprised to make it Stephon Gilmore just to keep him fresh. And then you have Byron Murphy and Shaq Griffin, and those are your two principal corners. When you want to go to nickel, you bring in Stephon Gilmore, you kick Byron Murphy inside, and now Stephon Gilmore is playing sort of a limited role. Although if you just paid him $10 million, maybe you want him on the field all the time. I believe that's making more than Shaq Griffin's making, so they value him higher than that. Yeah, 1 year, $4.5 million. It's over twice as much as Shaq Griffin is making. So maybe Shaq's the one that comes off the field. But either way, what I want to see from all of these guys that are these reclamation projects that once were, bona fide starters in the NFL is not necessarily to regain that form, but we just need them to survive. To just survive. And the blitzes and the crazy Flores stuff will get home. You just need to not be the guy that gets smoked so fast it ruins everything. That's the mission of a cornerback this year. Cho asks, what exact sickness makes Vikings fans before this even start to question why we would sign a good player and advocate for tanking the season? Yeah, this is the worst time to do that, right? The Vikings are 0-0. I think I could understand if you were mathematically eliminated and then signing 1 year free agency, be like, what are we doing? Just roll over that cap. Come on now. But at 0-0, anybody at this level of competition that lets projections or Vegas odds tell them that they can't win and listens to it does not belong at this level of competition. That's just the world that we live in. And I understand that if you think it's not a Super Bowl year and you think that anything that they do to try to be competitive in a year that's probably not a Super Bowl year, a lot of people see that as a waste of money. And while I understand that, I think it's a really weenie way to think. You engage in sports for the purpose of competition, to go shoulder to shoulder with the best and see how you come out. And ultimately, these are all just predictions. Stephon Gilmore is a tangible, concrete idea transaction. To not make it because of predictions is unsound, to say the least, because you can't know just how good those predictions are, especially in the NFL where there's surprise teams all the time. They all believe in themselves. You might not believe in them, and that's your prerogative, but they believe in themselves, and they're going to act accordingly, and you have to respect that. There are a whole bunch of other questions that I'm going to get to here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Twitter Tuesday rolls onward, coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Really cool stuff going on at FanDuel right now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet a $5 bet, any $5 bet, and you get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. With a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. You just need a Google account and a current form of payment, and don't worry, you can cancel anytime. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and download America's #1 sportsbook. We were just talking about on Locked On NFL, which I just got done recording. You can find that. You can find me on that on Tuesdays. We were talking a lot about the Commanders. Commanders are at 6.5 wins. So if you believe in Jaden Daniels, you put $5 down on Commanders over 6.5 wins at -120. It's getting hammered, by the way. It's at -120. If you want to join the masses there, you get 3 weeks of Sunday Ticket with YouTube and YouTube TV. So go check that out once again at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Moving right along here with the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. When you're done here, go check out Locked On Fantasy Football and get all that advice you need to nail your draft and even waiver wires coming up when the season actually starts in earnest. Next question here comes from Lewis Seen. His just name is Lewis. I guess this is hello, Lewis Seen. You congrats on the great preseason game. Says, is it possible that the leg fracture just put Seen on a delayed development path, and that the progress he's made this year is what we were hoping from him last year, meaning there's still a world where he's ready to be the Harrison Smith heir apparent? A reasonable hope for Lewis Seen to have, although the third person thing is a little bit off-putting. But I mean, yeah, that's always been the positive version of the narrative is, here are the excuses. None of them are lasting, right? There was the excuse that he hurt his leg. Okay, that's over now. He's past that. The excuse that, Donatel ruined it. Okay, well, Donatel's gone. And then the excuse that it was his first year in a new scheme. And while it was everyone's first year in a new scheme, for Lewis Seen in particular, for those 2022 guys in particular that were brought in to do one thing and now being asked to do another thing, and for Seen, who was with the Georgia defense and then had to go back and learn a Fangio, like zone, back off and rally thing, and now back to a more like pattern matchy kind of defense in the way that Flores asks you to do man coverage and the way that he like matches zone. Is it like going back and forth like that? That's going to be really hard for development. And you could probably continue to come up with excuses if Seen didn't, come forward. But hey, one good preseason game, while encouraging, isn't enough to assuage all those concerns and like validate those excuses. But they were always ideas I think you had to respect. You couldn't just brush them off because they were positive about a player you saw play negatively. There's still caveats, I guess, that are worth thinking about and keeping in the back of your mind. And we'll have to wait and see just how real this Lewis Seen kind of renaissance is. JJ2JJ asks, is Tristan Jackson closer to wide receiver 4 than being cut? Absolutely. I think cutting Tristan Jackson is completely out of the question at this point. He's had a good camp. He's had a good couple of good preseason games. You'd have to have some kind of like total disaster class against the Eagles with like drops and blowing blocks and a blow up on a sideline or something like that. Like you'd have to really, really blow it. I think at this point, Tristan Jackson has earned his spot. And then how close he is to wide receiver 4, I still think that's Brandon Powell's job. It's probably going to remain Brandon Powell's job. But yeah, I think he's making a push, making it interesting. Sure. But I think right now it's Jefferson, Addison, Naylor, Powell, Tristan Jackson. And if you want to keep a 6th, you can keep a 6th if you got a guy that you're super in love with from the rest of the group. A Lucky Jackson, a Trent Sherfield or whatever. But I don't think any of those guys have really moved the needle so much for me where I like have to force the issue and instead I can like keep another lineman or, figure out roster pressure elsewhere. Jack asks, do you think it's possible if we had a bad year that Kwesi and KOC may be on the hot seat? It's kind of my sense. So here's my deal with these guys. And I'm not going to answer this question every week, but I'll say it now at the outset, right? We're at the beginning of the season. It's a good time to take these kind of these questions that get talked about a lot, because I'm sure there's a lot. I know that there are a lot of you that are new. Here's my deal with these guys. They are on the coldest seat right now that you can pretty much get in year 3. The first 2 years were the Kirk thing, and we had to go try to be competitive about that. And now we are in the earnest rebuild. But because they got a lot of work done ahead of time, the earnest rebuild is going to be shorter than we're used to it. You go into full rebuilding mode, you basically have to just like cover your eyes for 3 years while your team is total trash. The Vikings aren't going to do that. They've got 1 year left of rebuilding, I would say, where they can maybe one more offseason to fix the secondary, and then the expectations can go to the roof. But for now, J.J. McCarthy hurt, so we're not even looking at that. There's kind of nothing I feel like that can happen this season that's so extreme that it changes the way that the Wilfs think about Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell. And right now, they're very happy with those 2 guys. And they're willing to, at the very least, be patient. The Vikings don't operate with that kind of Band-Aid thing. Now, this year could go so poorly where, again, you have sideline blowups, or you have some kind of scandal or some kind of disastrous thing. You go 2-15, and then we start having those kinds of conversations, or some kind of like coaching mishap that causes you to lose a bunch of games, Nathaniel Hackett style, where like you forgot what the score was or something like that, and you go, oh my God, this guy's totally inept. But based on the evidence we've seen so far, I don't think Kevin O'Connell has that kind of thing in him. And you'd have to see something sort of so dramatic it's unrealistic for this to be a conversation. Next year, though, if that's what you're talking about, then I think the expectations can hit the roof. And then if you win 6 games in 2025, despite this roster being super built up, then you have to start asking those existential questions. Another Luke asks, how was Jalen Redmond in preseason game 2 and or joint practices? Thought he flashed in game 1, but didn't notice him against the Browns. He was still pretty good. I think he was kind of the same guy. So I mentioned it last week, when I watched Jalen Redmond on the Raiders tape, I saw more of the downs that I hadn't noticed on the live watch, and it sort of tempered me on him a little bit. He still had a very good game, but it sort of, turn it from an A to a B for me kind of deal. And it sort of gave me like caveats to that went, oh, okay, he's not just like this totally found diamond in the rough type. He's just like a third teamer that had a good day. And I would kind of use the same descriptor against the Browns. Third teamer that had a good day. I don't know if that climbs you up the depth chart, especially with what Levi Drake Rodriguez has done in that game. That just totally overshadowed him. But nothing to be mad about for sure. Still playing well on those stunts and being agile. But I think him like making the 53-man roster is still a pretty tough thing. You got to wade through a lot of really good guys now. That depth on that D-line. Like, he wasn't better than Taki Taimani, and he wasn't better than Levi Drake Rodriguez. So even though he played pretty well, other guys still might have played better. That's the way it goes. There's only so many spots. Skull Chester asks, are we right to be hyped about LDR and Bo Richter? I would say 1-1 there. I think Bo Richter had an overrated game last week. He got the 1 sack. That was a good play. He had a couple of pressures. He had some flashy good plays, but he also had some like play ruining errors that like really were influential. And you can't have that. I think about the sequence that his sack came in, where it was a rollout. He got totally lost in the sauce, hesitated, and the quarterback had all the time in the world to find a big play downfield. And on the very next rep, it was the same rollout, same direction, at him again, and with no hesitation, he went in, and that's when he got his sack. I love to see that sort of lesson learned in real time, but the roller coaster was up and down. In terms of Levi Drake Rodriguez, oh boy, wow, yeah, I'm in. I'm ready to get irresponsible. Look, it's like against second teamers, you're going to temper it. If you watch my Patreon video on it, where I'm being a little more serious, we can temper it. We can find things about his pass rush that I don't really like. But in terms of just the muscle and just kind of like out fighting some of these guys, you can tell he's worked to add strength, and you can tell that the way that he plays against doubles, the way that he uses his hands in particular, really, really nice with that. that I think was a good enough game to just pencil him into the roster and call it a day. Again, I mean, there's one preseason game left. Bad stuff can happen that makes you rethink all this. But as we're doing it now, that game and playing pretty well against the Raiders as well was enough. Zach asks, if we find out tomorrow that Addison is suspended for the first 3 games of the season, what does the wide receiver room look like? JJ, Naylor, Powell, Tristan Jackson, and Lucky, do they bring in someone? I don't know if you bring in a guy just for 3 games that becomes obsolete after 3. You're not going to spend resources on that, right? Maybe you bring in some reject waiver cut or something like that, but you wait for that kind of guy. But otherwise, you roster Trent Sherfield for a few weeks, and then you bump him back down to the practice squad, or maybe you wanted to keep him anyways. I would say that in this group, this wide receiver group, I would say that Sherfield is above Lucky, but otherwise you got the order right. JJ, Naylor, Powell, Tristan, Sherfield, Lucky. And it's if you want to keep a 6th guy because Addison is out, you have Lucky on the roster, and then you cut him once Addison comes back, you put him back to the practice squad, and you move on from there. But really, it's going to be one of those roster bubble type guys that is maybe on the 53, maybe not. And you say, well, he'll be on for 3 weeks, and then, we make the harder decision. That said, I don't think that it happens imminently. I still kind of feel like we learn about the suspension for next year. And it would really suck to blindside the Vikings with that 2 seconds before a game, but that is how these things tend to go. Got a couple more questions to wrap up with next on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Next up on the Locked On Vikings podcast, unserious questions only, which is usually how the third segment of this goes, but is also just the name this person put in the Google form, who says, do we currently have more podcasters or people older than you on the roster? Is that a good thing? A Minnesota football party enjoyer, I see. We were laughing about how now that a 33-year-old has joined I'm 32. There are 4 players on the team now, including Stephon Gilmore, that are older than me. Harrison Smith, DePaula, Stephon Gilmore, and David Questenberry. Also, I should mention, too, they signed Justin Hall, wide receiver, UFL recently, played for the Raiders for a good while, and they waived Seth Vernon, so the punting competition is over, and they waived Ty James, who had a special teams disaster class. That's the kind of thing that gets you, very quickly cut, special teams disaster class in Cleveland. That's also there. So I don't know who on the team is a podcaster anymore. Do you mean literal podcaster? Because we don't have Colin Thompson anymore. He was literally a podcaster. Or are we talking about podcaster as a body type, which was a running bit that I had talking about the wide receivers in the 2023 class that were all tiny, which was Addison and Flowers and Smith and Jigba that were all podcaster sized people because they were all really close to my height and weight. And that's not good. So I was look at all these podcasters. But I don't know who actually has a show on this one, on the team anymore. So I guess I would have to say there are more people my age, or older than my age. Purple Nurple asks, do you think Tua's recent comments will help us retain Flores because he won't get any looks for head coaching jobs? If our defense balls out, will teams forget that? So what Purple Nurple is responding to is referring to here is comments from Tua Tagovailoa about his relationship to Brian Flores. He didn't name Brian Flores, I don't think, but it was clearly talking about when coaches tell you, and essentially said Coach told me I wasn't worth anything. Coach told me I couldn't throw, that kind of stuff. It was painting Brian Flores as very mean, evil guy. It goes along with the narrative that has come out of Miami ever since the Stephen Ross tanking thing happened, and Stephen Ross allegedly pressuring Flores to tamper with Tom Brady and try to recruit him basically, and all of that stuff that Flores kind of refused to go along with, and then they painted him as the angry black man. That's Brian Flores' words and from his side of the lawsuit and all that stuff. Not touching all that crap with a 10-foot pole. But as it pertains to Tua, 2 things. One, some NFL teams really appreciate a coach that's a hard ass like that. And the other thing is that it's August And by the time we're making this decision, an entire season will have happened. And we're going to judge things on that, not on the Tua comments. And the other thing too is like that's Tua talking about it publicly, but everybody who's making these decisions already knows about all that crap. So if they were considering Brian Flores, the fact that it became public doesn't mean that they're going to stop considering Brian Flores. They either care about it or they don't, unless they really think the PR is bad. But I don't think the PR is powerful enough. Not in the same way as it would be for like John Gruden, where the PR is so radioactive that, you have to like rethink the merits of this guy as a coach. But I don't think the PR has that kind of staying power. Turner Enjoyer asks, is Dallas Turner simply the next Micah Parsons? I'm afraid we have to say yes. Cowboys fans, look away, okay? No, I'm really excited about Dallas Turner, but we got to chill probably a little bit. We got to relax. He's still got to prove it in a real game, but everything I've seen from him, I really like. I like the technique. I like the tenacity and all that stuff. I like the plan, the strategy that he comes up with. I did a Patreon video about him, which is now free to watch, by the way. Patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL. You can go watch that for free. If you join me, you can watch the things I make about the Browns game before next week. But after the Philly game, those will become free as well. And then the Philly games will be early access and so on. So you can go watch the Dallas Turner one now if you want. But the comp to Micah Parsons is one that has popped into my head stylistically. Like, look, Micah Parsons is one of the best defenders in the league and a front runner for defensive player of the year, if you ask me. So like chill. But stylistically, as a guy with that kind of like positional versatility and that kind of weaponized length where he's long, but he's not only long, but he understands how to use it, is it's a very exciting combination. And we can definitely be excited, but let's not Micah Parsons. I know you weren't super being serious, but yeah. Rob Meek asks, with starters sitting in preseason game 3, what does this week of practice look like? Any changes to reps for certain players? If you're going to play a lot, I'm going to guess you practice a lot. If you're not going to play a lot, I'm going to guess they chill it out for the starters, for the players that have kind of already, solidified their hold on the team. They're probably going to hold those guys out a little bit more and let them have a little bit more of a restful week. And then really, grind at the guys that are, hey, you two, you're in competition for a roster spot. You're getting every single rep. And you guys are going to play next to each other, and we're going to see who comes out on top. That would be my guess, but obviously I don't really get to know that, and neither do we. That's all going to be pretty private. John Hunter asks, with the terribly unfortunate circumstance with KJ, is there anything the NFL CBA or rules say that would see the Vikings getting any draft compensation in the following years? There's nothing like that in the CBA. Draft compensation is not something you get for what I'll call, circumstance outside of the team's control. While it may be fair to try to, give compensation like that for a player that, you spend a draft pick and then you get nothing out of it before that player tragically passes away. That's just not how it's built. That's not how the league is. It's not really principally how the league is built. Things outside your control may not be fair, but you still have to deal with them. And every team has to deal with some level of them, some more extreme than others. But that is sort of an unalienable reality of the NFL. What the CBA does, by the way, the CBA is not a set of rules. It's a union agreement. So the CBA is really more focused on making sure that Kyrie Jackson's family is taken care of, that the money that was guaranteed in his contract is properly paid out to his estate. And all of those sort of labor rights things that a union would care about. But in terms of competition and the rule sets, no, there's no provision like that. Bryson Kent asks, this will be the last one today. If you were managing an NFL team with XFL talent and had all 32 first-round picks in this upcoming draft, how would you go about the season and draft and future? Okay, so assuming I already have those guys under contract and they're XFL level talent, which means they probably have XFL level cap hits. So I'm flush with assets, but I have nothing. This is essentially how would you manage an expansion team. But if I had all 32 picks, which would be a very broken way to do an expansion team, you would want to do an expansion draft and kind of get people to put up their players, and then you get a whole bunch of okay players, and then you get the first overall pick. That's how the Texans were built back in 2002. That's a much more fair way to do it. But if I got all 32 first round picks, I'm thinking about that and I'm thinking, okay, I'm targeting my quarterback and I'm taking him. And then I'm drafting, all my blue chip players. And I'm not, anybody I give a blue chip grade to, I'm drafting them, and I'm going to have a talent cliff there. And then after that, I start opening the phones for trades to see if I can't maximize value there. Because I'm getting all the blue chip players, I feel like a lot better about kind of, diversifying that. But if I have 32 first round picks or the draft equivalent of 32 first round picks, a lot of my XFL players aren't making the team. So the other thing I would do as well is identify where this draft class is weak and approach free agency really hard there and try to build up a team like as fast as possible and get some veteran leadership on the team there as well. So I'm okay with getting some older players, and I'm definitely okay with getting some more expensive players because I'm flush with cash. But I would not have super high expectations for year one where you're relying a lot on rookies. But once that class of rookies gets there, years 2 and 3 would be pretty good. And the other thing I would do is probably try to trade into future years. Because if I have 32 first round picks right now, when those players' rookie contracts expire, I'm in for a world of hurt trying to replace them with a normal draft capital. So I'm going to probably want to take all those draft picks and trade a few of them into next year, and the next year trade a few into the year after that, and try to kind of stagger it a little bit better, so that I don't have all my light bulbs going out at once. That's definitely an important thing that I would have to kind of think about as well. Of those 32, I probably still would only take one quarterback. I'm going to pick my guy and go with him. Spending 2 first round picks on 2 quarterbacks is bound to waste one of them. And I don't really think I have that luxury if I have a team with only XFL talent. But I think if I can, properly stagger and be a little bit responsible about how I'm rationing all of these assets from year to year to year to year, then I can start to build a team where the expiry of contracts is also staggered, and I can sort of from there hopefully be close enough to a normal situation where now I'm just like a normal team with normal cap problems every year. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast. Thank you so much for hanging out. Go check out Locked On Fantasy Football. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skol.